All right, good morning everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for this event. My name's Matthew Harding, for those who don't know me, and I'm the Dean of the Law School. Can I start by acknowledging the country that we're on, the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also want to acknowledge my Indigenous colleagues from the Melbourne Law School who, under the leadership of Eddie Cubillo, are doing transformative work here. And I want to welcome all our Indigenous friends and colleagues who are here with us today. Thank you so much for coming. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to this special event, which is a follow-on from a really major public event that was held at the Melbourne Town Hall last night to celebrate the Sydney Peace Prize recipient for 2021-22, the Uluru Statement from the Heart. It really was an extraordinary event. Professor Megan Davis spoke with profound clarity and conviction, and Pat Anderson AO, who's with us today, provided us with a very clear understanding of our responsibilities as we go to the ballot box around this very important referendum that is coming. We're honoured to have Pat Anderson here today. Thank you for joining us at the end of what you've just described as a gruelling two-week tour. And Bridget Cama as well. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. In a minute, Eddie Cubillo is going to introduce our speakers in greater detail, but let me just briefly introduce Eddie. Dr Eddie Cubillo is the Director of our Indigenous Law and Justice Hub here at the Melbourne Law School, and he's also our Associate Dean Indigenous. Eddie is an Aboriginal man with strong family links in both urban and rural areas in the Northern Territory. He's a descendant of the Larrakia, Wadjigan and Central Arrernte peoples. Eddie comes to us at the law school after a very long and distinguished career in public service. And I won't recount all of those appointments, but they do include an appointment as Anti-Discrimination Commissioner of the Northern Territory, Executive Officer of National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Service, and work on the Royal Commission into the Protection and Detention of Children in the Northern Territory as the Director of Community Engagement. In 2015, he was named National Indigenous Legal Professional of the Year. Eddie's work in the law school leading the Indigenous Law and Justice Hub is an absolutely critical program of work for us as a legal institution in this country at what is an extremely important historical moment for us all. Eddie, I'm just going to hand over to you now to introduce our distinguished guests. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Just want to acknowledge we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri people and acknowledge that their lands were never ceded. I'd also like to acknowledge all other Indigenous peoples in the rooms and people of colour and everyone else here. Thank you for coming. It's a very important time in our history. I've been a former chairperson of our regional council on ATSIC, the former voice to government and everyone else who would listen. And unfortunately, in the wisdom of our political parties, they, to use words from an Indigenous man, Jeff Scott, they executed ATSIC without even following their own recommendations that they did a review into ATSIC. And unfortunately, as we all know as Indigenous people, that these recommendations are piling up and no one's listening to them. Thank you for the acknowledgement, Matthew. It's a bit overwhelming. I'm next to Auntie Pat, who's from the Northern Territory.
We're both from the Northern Territory. We know our families.
Yep, who I've known for a long time and admired. She's in a health space, but she also advocates really strongly for Indigenous people. One of the major things that I remember as a young legal person was Little Children's a Sacred report, which he co-authored, which led to all sorts of political things that was, again, recommendations ignored and things done themselves in regards to an intervention in the Northern Territory. I've got a bit to say about you, but it's not enough. So maybe I should get you to introduce yourself.
I think that's enough. We can stop there. We can stop there.
So I'll just, for everyone else probably who not as across Indigenous affairs as some of us, Annie Pat is one of the architects of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. She's also a Aliwa woman known nationally and internationally as a powerful advocate for the health of Australian First Peoples. She has extensive experience in Aboriginal health, including community development, policy formation and research ethics. She has served as a co-chair of the Referendum Council, is the current chairperson of the Remote Area Health Corporation and the chairperson of the Lower Chair Institute. She's also the inaugural patron of the Women's Safety Services of Central Australia. She was appointed Officer of the Order of Australia in 2014 for her services to the Indigenous community as a social justice advocate. And this, overall, she's someone who really cares about everybody, and it's very hard to come by these days. Now, our budding advocate here is Bridget Cama. She's a Wiradjuri and Fijian woman from central west New South Wales with connections to the Kajigong River near Mudgee. Bridget was born and grew up in Lithgow before moving to Sydney in 2014 to study at the University of New South Wales. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts, Laws with distinctions in Indigenous Studies in 2019. Bridget has previously worked at Gilbert and Tobin and on comment to the Northern Land Council and Chalk and Brent. In a current role with the Uluru Dialogue, Bridget is an associate at the Indigenous Law Centre at the University of New South Wales. She's co-chair of the Uluru Youth Dialogue alongside Alira Davis and part of the legal team supporting the Uluru Dialogue, working with Balnav's Professor of Constitutional Law, Megan Davis, and the Officer of Pro Vice Chancellor Indigenous at the University of New South Wales. So can we just give a big welcome to our two people today? I think before we throw it out to the floor for people to ask questions, we're going to watch a short video just to get people to see some background on the issues and concerns.
I think the messaging from the Uluru Convention is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are going to take control back of this recognition process. I think what we heard from all the dialogues was overwhelmingly universal in that people wanted the tools to make an actual difference to their lives on the ground. We distilled all of the information that the 13 dialogues gave us and came out with a model that involved treaty making, a voice to the Parliament and a truth commission.
We cannot continue to go on anymore being voiceless and powerless in our own lands. So far we don't have any say in any legislation, any policy at all. So from here, what we're saying to Australia is this relationship between us, this very poor relationship, full of rampant racism and what have you, has to stop. The country has to be mature and sophisticated enough to have an intelligent conversation so we can all move forward and solve this unfinished business between us all, because it's definitely time.
People want to make sure the truth is never forgotten, and that we as Australians, we can talk truthfully about the past. We should never let the past be a burden upon us, but at the same time, it will always be a burden if we don't face up to it. And denial is no solution to that burden. In fact, the weight of that burden increases the more determined we are to try and force a denial and a forgetfulness about it. So one of the really strong messages from all of the dialogues, but emphasised here this week, is that the First Nations want our own people and the rest of Australia to engage in a process of truth-telling, a lot like other societies that have been racked by division and the wounds of the past. A lot of other societies have established truth-telling processes to lay the groundwork for a more united future, and this is what our people have done here this week.
In my work as a United Nations expert, I've been able to look across, the 70 countries of the United Nations who have significant Indigenous populations and see that that kind of voice to the Parliament, that kind of parliamentary institution is quite a conventional way that member states accommodate Indigenous peoples within the state. So it's no surprise to me that that has come up as a significant legal reform option for communities who feel like they don't have any power and they don't have any voice. And what we did hear from the dialogues right around the country is a very strong sense of powerlessness and voicelessness. People feel they don't have community control anymore. They feel like their communities are run from Canberra. And I think that's a really important message for the Prime Minister and opposition leader to hear, that communities feel so profoundly unhappy with the way Aboriginal polities are situated and located within the life of the Australian state.
There's heaps of overlap, heaps of common ground, heaps of common themes, and of course the consensus was around us calling for a voice to Parliament, constitutionally mandated. It is a substantial proposal. It's a critically important proposal. And the message that came out of the dialogues was unanimous on this, and it was confirmed as the priority. But the hopes of our people are that it will be this voice that sets up the next stage of our movement towards agreement making under a Makarrata Commission. The old idea of a Makarrata is more than 30 years old. It's a well-established idea, a Yolngu name for people coming together after a disagreement. And so the concept of the Makarrata has been re-invoked in our struggle, and where the Uluru Statement says that one of the functions of the Voice to Parliament is to advocate with government the establishment of a Makarrata Commission to supervise agreement making between First Nations and governments.
And Pat just asked me if you could kick off. She wants to say something, and then we'll go to questions then.
Just quickly, I just want to explain what you just saw. There's a lot of misinformation about this process, so we're going to try and debunk some of that, showing you the whole range of people from across. It was a sample group. from across the nation, and you will see there were 2 locations. We needed all of this to hold the meeting, but all of that was underpinned by the cultural authority given to us by the people from Uluru and led by Sammy Wilson, Sammy Uluru. So the ceremonial ground that you saw, they took them 3 months to build that, and we had all of the ceremonies out there, including a couple of evening functions and barbecue, so it was a blending of the two. And every day, Uluru sent at least 6 elders to sit in the front desk too. So it was an application of, which is really important, the cultural authority, which probably hasn't happened in quite that same way. In fact, all of the people who came to the dialogues, there was, I suppose for want of a better word, a formula. 60% had to be traditional owners and custodians of land. 20% from the organisations and important people, organisations rather, in the region, because although they're held in certain places, they're expected to include the region. The referendum council, which I co-chaired with Mark Liebler, we didn't invite anybody. It was a host organisation for each of the regional dialogues who gave us the list of people that wanted to come, satisfying the categories as I've just started to tell you, TOs and custodians, organisations, and then from the region, and then the other remaining 20%, stolen generations, people who didn't fit any of those criteria, plus important people, influencers in their communities, and also people that were well known, always had the opposite point of view. You know, you bring everybody into the tent. So that was the last. So that was each the same agenda. 3 days was the same in the whole 12 areas. We had an information day in Canberra. Each of those dialogues were hosted by a local organisation, either a land council, it was a consortium of organisations in South Australia, it was a council of elders and so on in Canberra, and so on around the country. So it was exactly the same timing, and also the facilitators, not so much, but the working group the host organisation would select a working group of 7 people, and they would handle all the local logistics. AATSIS, Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, they organised it, they had the logistics, we tendered them out to go and work with the host organisations and do who supplied the venue, all of the staff, everything. So we came in as presenters, if you like, the team as me, Megan and myself. We had a set program. So we became presenters, and all the business was handled by each of those dialogues. We had 5 or 6 terms of reference, and Megan brought her team in, and each of those didn't lead the discussion. They were to facilitate the discussion and answer any questions that might arise. So that's how it came. And then each of those meetings, by election, because we want to send 7 people from your area to the convention. We said, how do you want to do it? Select, elect, appoint. Everybody chose an election. So all of the delegates, we would elect 7 people to go to the convention. And that's what happened. So that's how all of those people there were sent there by their own group. Now, the regional dialogues were an extensive civics, it was an education, as well as understanding the policies. It's pretty unusual to get a whole group, especially Aboriginal people, to sit down for 3 days and talk about the Constitution and change and how it might be changed. What we came up with after all of that process was the Uluru Statement from the heart. People, ex-High Court Judge Murray Gleeson, and there were sort of several of them, said that all of these constitutional lawyers, nobody ever thought of this. No one had ever thought about it before. And it was not expected, of course, to the extent that the Prime Minister rejected it out of hand almost immediately. But, he'll be on the wrong side of history. Remember him. There's no doubt. There's no doubt about it. Whatever happens, that was such a really ridiculous decision that he decided to make. But anyhow, that's for him to deal with. So we didn't take no for an answer. So we just kept working. And now the new government, after 5 years of or nearly longer now, 6 years. He said that he would take the country, would implement the Uluru Statement from the heart in the first term, and he's done that. He's going to take the country to a referendum, and that's what we need to be prepared for now. But we won't be able to cover all the misinformation that's already out there, and it will continue and get worse. So I wanted you to understand, I mean, somebody even wrote an article to say that there were 70% of over the people who went to the conventions and to the regional dialogues are all non-Aboriginal people, or 70%. So it just, gets ridiculous. It's going to be hard for you to discern, but you're expected to, especially people like yourselves. We're going to rely on you. You're well educated, you're healthy, and it's your turn. It's your turn. History is certainly calling, and it's really up to you. So I ask you to inform yourself. We've got a really good, there's lots of literature around, lots of webinars, there's heaps of stuff. You have access to the whole world here at Melbourne Uni. So when you get into the ballot box, that you will make an informed decision. And you have to make it yourself, because you're going to be there, or it's just you and your conscience. And you have to make the vote according to your conscience and take responsibility for how you voted. This is really our turn. History is calling. We don't want to leave it to your kids to have this all over again. We've been doing this since pretty much the first boats arrived. Over and over, almost each generation, over and over again. Voice to Parliament is not new. It comes here from, the first man to talk about that was William Cooper, a Yorta Yorta man from out here in Victoria. He talked about a voice to Parliament. So none of this is new. It's just the difference is it's our turn. There's a real opportunity here to do something, to do everything completely different. We don't have to follow any rules here. We have pretty much got a clean slate. The Uluru Statement was not popular, as you all know. People thought this was just crazy. And it was not unexpected. We didn't know neither that was what people were going to come up with. But the other thing you need to know, it was a very conscious, mindful decision to gift it to you. Gift it to the Australian people, not to the politicians of the day, because you have the power. Yes, the government has to set up all the machinery to make it all happen, but in the end, once they do that, it's up to the people of Australia. So you have to decide and ask yourselves the question and reimagine. Megan talks about this beautifully, and because law has the potential also to redeem. You know more about that than I do. But to reimagine what we could and should be, and I suppose as an individual, as a nation, that we begin to fully realise our remarkable potential that we have here in people and resources and where we live in the world and so on. We're nowhere near that. This is a real opportunity for nation building here, and to come to terms with our bloody past. It is bloody and horrible, the frontier wars. We have to rewrite the history. That's the true history of the nation, not just a small group of people who came, just over 200 years ago. It's much bigger than that. And I don't understand why Australians were never able to fully embrace that we're living in a country where we're the oldest surviving civilisation in the world. It means Australians don't seem to, I don't know. I don't understand. But listen, there's a real opportunity here, and I'm going to be quiet now and listen to your questions.
Because I got asked to chair this, I'll get the first couple of questions, okay? So, see that picture there?
Yeah, I do. I was looking at it.
I was there last week, right? And I was at East Woody sitting on the beach, and I was thinking, we went there for the Royal Commission, and as you said, I was thinking, we've had all these Royal Commissions and all these recommendations, and nothing's changing, right? And I was thinking about when I was on ATSIC and all the programs that we initiated from a grassroots level are still running, right? Which reinforces that, grassroots decision making. And then I was thinking what you were saying then, about my grandparents telling me that they endured the stolen generation, they endured all these policies that didn't allow them to walk on their country or without having a dog tag. Or And I wondered, while I was sitting at East Woody there, wondering what's next. And can you just elaborate on
That's the whole point.
on the journey that you...
Yeah, that's the whole point. Whatever we've done, and however good, myself included, and you and your parents and your grandparents, everything we've done really hasn't worked. All the money that goes into Aboriginal affairs it really hasn't. We've got, in the Northern Territory where we come from, we've got 10-year-old boys in Spitalwoods, in prisons, you know, and we've got a generation or two that can't read and write. When I was at school, because this isn't in the past, this is now. When I was at school, it was a little bit while ago, but not that long, the only job available to me, nothing wrong with it, was to be a cleaner, either at the local hospital or to a non-Indigenous family to be a cleaner. Nothing wrong with being a cleaner, but that was the only option that was available to me. In my mother, it was public policy of the day not to teach her to read and write. So the history is here, it's happening every day. And we have to do something out of the box here, something extraordinary, so that we don't fall into that same old, something, because really, in the end, it really hasn't worked. That's why we don't know how the voice is going to work, but it's based on a totally unexpected premise from this whole process that we show. So there's an opportunity here to do everything differently, so we don't revert back to same old. There is a very conservative streak amongst a whole lot of people that have an opinion about this voice to Parliament. People are very comfortable in their zones, but that's not going to work. We have to come with something completely different, and that is returning power and self-determination to all of those communities that are out there, whether it's Kintore or a suburb of Sydney or wherever. So that Kintore can speak, that voice can go straight to the table to speak directly to Parliament about all the issues that plague them all the time. Nobody asks us hardly about anything. We're not involved in the real decision making. As it says in the Uluru Statement, some of the things that, well, most of the things that we are suffering today, it's the torment of our powerlessness. The torment of our powerlessness. We've still got a generation mostly in jail. Kids still aren't, you know, well, in the Northern Territory and other areas, of course, the Kimberley, North Queensland, they're just going crazy.
Just one short one, then, and I'll go into Sissia. But when you left Darwin, you told me you was retiring. and I bumped into Mick Gooder. He told me he was retiring when he left the Social Justice Commission. Can you explain to our audience here? There's no retirement, right?
No.
Can you explain? What do you... I mean, you've fought in the health space for forever, right? Started at before Dinner
I was in
Bilbo, right?
education before that.
Yeah.
With Ken White and Linda Burney.
Yeah.
Anyhow, how do we keep going?
And then, yeah, and like, you're also looking after your grandkid as well. He's a nice young man.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah. So, can you just give him sort of like an understanding of what that means for an Indigenous person when the system fails us, and why you need to continue, and how that relates to what we're trying to do with the voice?
We're still here, despite the bloody history, the genocide, the murders, the racism, being excluded, being made to feel separate in our own lands. That makes you tough. It makes you really think, they're not going to get me. They are never going to get me. So family after family says, do your darndest. We ain't going anywhere. This is our place. And you better believe it, we ain't going nowhere. So I think there's this, somehow, and we don't often talk about it, because I was thinking, how am I going to answer you? Because I know what you're saying, I'm not too sure myself, but it's just that, look, as the scientists' tools get more and more sophisticated, that year, 60,000, 65,000 years, the last number I read was 100,000. They're yet to prove it. So how long do you have to live on a piece of country and not be part of it? See, we believe we were always here, that we came up from the earth with the stories, the dreaming stories, the Dukba stories and what have you. So we believe we've always been here. So I think you get a degree of toughness. We did fight back. We're not, there's a belief here that we all sort of laid down and said, take it over. We didn't. That didn't happen. That was written out of the history on purpose. It was a political decision not to talk about any opposition that we made. We got the frontier wars. That we always knew. One of the saddest things, I'm really on my feet here thinking about trying to answer this question. I was probably in grade 3 or grade 4. They're at school, running around prep camp. We grew up in a camp, Eddie's family and mine. And we did go to school though, eh?
Yeah.
School was non-negotiable. They used to belt you to go to school, our parents and what have you. So we did go to, and I'm sitting there in the class, this teacher I quite liked, and she's telling this story, about this bloke called Captain Cook. He came on a boat and he discovered Australia, and I'm sitting there and I'm listening to her, and I thought, this woman is lying. This woman that I quite liked, she tells lies. And it's taken me a whole, till pretty much to sitting here, to get over that. That white people tell you lies. And I learnt that when I was in grade 3, grade 4 perhaps. And it's taken me most of my life to get over that. So I think that leads, that resilience, and after all, this is our place. We got nowhere else to go.
Yep.
So do your darndest, and you have done. And we're still here.
Thank you, Annie. All right, sis. Big shoes to fill.
I know.
Megan Davis. Megan Davis called you up and said, "You're it." So
No pressure.
no pressure. The brains trust of the voice. Can you just let everyone know, as a youth, and as a young lawyer, what's your role, and where you, as one of the co-chairs of the youth leadership,
Yeah.
what's the voice coming out of that little group?
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge country and pay my respects to the elders, past and present, and also want to acknowledge both you, yourself, Eddie, and Auntie Pat, for all the work that you've done to allow us as young people to get to this point in history. I think growing up, it was both of your names that I heard, and so to have mentors and leadership like this in our communities is really important. So as Eddie said, I'm co-chair of the Uluru Youth Dialogue alongside Uluru Davis, and we have a national youth network of First Nations young people aged between 18 and 30 who are passionate about the voice and the Uluru Statement from the heart, and we stand by the mandate that it calls for voice and makarata to oversee agreement-making processes and truth-telling processes. What we're hearing from young people is that they just want to get it done. We can't believe that we're still having the conversations now, as Auntie Pat said, that she's had to have throughout her lifetime, and we absolutely don't want to leave it to the next generation to have the same conversations as we're having today. So we feel a very heavy sense of responsibility to make sure that this happens in our lifetime, but we obviously stand on the shoulders of our older people and those that have come before us to make sure that this happens. So a lot of the work that our youth do is on the ground, getting out, yarning to people, everyday Australians, about what the Uluru Statement is, the journey that led to the Uluru Statement, which Auntie Pat touched on, which is super important for everybody in this room to understand, so that you're able to go and talk to your people, your communities, your families, your friends, people at work about why this is so important and why it holds so much power. It's the process that was thought out so meticulously by the First Nations peoples on the Referendum Council. And that, of course, led to consensus on the voice. That's really important to understand, and our young people understand that process, and that's why we can stand strongly by the statement and what it calls for, is because it holds that cultural authority. As Auntie Pat said, those 13 dialogues, it was the communities that decided who were going to be consulted. It wasn't up to the referendum council, it was all determined by self-determination of those communities. And it is unprecedented. It's one of the most amazing processes that has happened in our shared history for First Nations peoples to be consulted on what meaningful constitutional reform they want to see. And as Auntie Pat said, the voice is what people wanted. They are the people that chose this reform. It wasn't decided by a select group of people in a room, you know, a bubble to the outside world. This was actually people on the ground saying, we want to have a say over the issues that affect us. And so our young people are saying, despite them not being personally consulted at these consultations, some of them were there, but not all of us were there. But we can stand strongly in that mandate because we understand that the process was done the right way. The people that were consulted were people on the ground. This is about the people. This isn't about Parliament. This isn't about government. This isn't about politicians. This is about the people. And our young people just think that it's this is the best thing on the table right now to lead to a future where we can all flourish, and this is our future as young people, and it's all of your futures as well, and that's why you should feel a responsibility around this. And it's your business as well as our business. Even though we're talking about a First Nations voice, it is something that will benefit all Australians, and having First Nations people's voices at the table when we're having policies that are being decided in Parliament that affect our lives, when we're having decisions being made by the executive that affect our lives, we should be at that table to inform those policies and those laws and those decisions to the best of our ability, so that when they're rolled out on the ground, they are informed in a way that will close that gap that we continue to talk about. They will be able to have programs that address all of the dire statistics that we continue to see published. We don't want the status quo, and we're sick of it, and we need to change it, and the only way to do that is to give us some responsibility, give us some political power so that we can contribute positively to that. And our young people absolutely stand by that and stand by the decision made at the Uluru Convention in 2017. So we continue to get out there and talk to people like yourselves about it, and we want people to make an informed decision when it comes time to vote in that ballot box. And Auntie Pat said, she says it very eloquently, that it's just you and your conscience on that day. But we're also relying on you to have the conversations with other people and spread that message as well, because we only make up 3% of the population as First Nations peoples. It's the Australian people who will decide the future of this nation, and I personally believe, and our youth dialogue believes, that the time is now. We have to start dealing with the unfinished business of the past to enable us to start healing and move forward for a better future for everybody.
Thank you, sis. Before I throw out to the audience, who has read the Uluru Statement? Okay.
Pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I'm not going to let you get off that easy, right?
That was my piece.
So Megan's there, and she's written a lot about this space, particularly the systemic structures that impede our people from progressing. And you're a law graduate. Mm. What's your personal view on how we change the legal system of this country?
Yeah. I think it's by listening to our people and being able to give our people that space and that power. I think Megan talks about this, that when the dialogue process happened, there was a sense of exhaustion around consultation because nothing ever comes of it. So we even saw that happen with the Uluru Statement. This generous gift was issued to the Australian people, but then we had a response from the Malcolm Turnbull government that said no, yet again, despite setting up the Referendum Council and saying, what do you want? When that answer was given, it was then that was all taken away again. So there's a sense of responsibility there, but I think it takes people such as Auntie Pat and such as Professor Davis to drive these reforms. And I guess it ties a little bit into your question around resilience and fatigue, because Auntie Pat shouldn't have to still be having this fight today. But she is. And we're so grateful to have you, Auntie Pat, doing that.
I know the point.
But you shouldn't have to be doing that. And it just, I think, is a reflection of how much work this nation has to do.
Sure.
In terms of, reforming or legal reform, Megan talks about imagining and reimagining what this nation can be. And I think I learnt through law school, when you're sitting in a room such as this, there's all these structures in place, but the whole point of me wanting to pursue a law degree was understanding that it is systems that subjugate our people. And Megan does talk about this as well, is that it can subjugate people, but it can also redeem. And that's what people were asked to do at the dialogues, is reimagine an Australia that they want to live in, that they want their children to grow up in and future generations to grow up in. And what does that look like, and how do we achieve that? So that's what people were asked to do. And they said, we want to address our powerlessness and our voicelessness. And that's where, of course, the reforms called for by the statement come from. It takes people on the ground to come up with these solutions. Like Auntie Pat said, no constitutional lawyer or expert had thought about this solution before for our powerlessness and voicelessness. It took our people on the ground to do that. And it's taken our people to continue to stand by that mandate for over 5 years now to get it to this point. So we're doing heavy lifting, our people. And I believe we'll get there. We will change laws, and we will move towards positive reform and substantial reform that changes systems that currently oppress us and allow for and enable the issues that we're currently facing in our communities that really haven't changed. We still shouldn't have the highest incarceration rate in the world. We shouldn't still have black deaths in custody. We shouldn't have our children being taken away at unprecedented rates. Like, how do we feel as a nation on an international stage having those national shames against our name? And the voice will impact all of those things. I'm not saying it's a solution to those things, but it's the next step. It's the next pragmatic step to take to truly begin to address those issues, allowing us to take some of the responsibility, allowing us to come up with the solutions that we know work in community, as you said, Eddie. Those things that are happening on the ground, that's only because we're activating on the ground in communities, struggling with funding and doing what we can, and they're all led by community. We saw in COVID communities that had the ability to lock down to protect their people, their communities. They were some of the first to do that. And Auntie Pat, you'd know, of course, about that with your history and contributions to health and Indigenous health in this country. First Nations communities are the people that governments and local communities came to after the bushfires and now after the floods, saying, what can we do to fix these issues? We're facing, climate change, and our people have solutions to a lot of the things, devastation that's happening with our environments. And people are coming back to First Nations peoples and saying, can we work together? Like, that's amazing. That's what we want to see in this country. We want to be able to work together to address the issues that we face personally in our lives, as well as the issues that the nation faces as a whole. But it takes us having some of that political power to get those solutions happening.
Thanks, Sus. Megan's texting me too and asking me how you're going. So
She
better give me a good review.
She's relentless.
I'll text her later saying, You better watch out. She might. You're taking over. So I'll throw out to the audience now. Anyone? Anne?
I've got a mic. Thank you. I didn't know if I needed a mic or not. My name's Anne Genovese. I teach here at Melbourne Law School, so I'd like to thank both of you. I think maybe I don't need it. I'd like to thank both of you for being here today. It's an extremely important thing to be in a student space and to speak to our students. And I wanted to just pick up on a couple of things you asked and to get some advice for this particular, use the microphone, this particular group of people. So I agree, there is a conservative streak all over Australia in all sorts of ways. And, listening to some of the public debate and misinformation about that you've addressed so eloquently this morning, like who was there and which Indigenous groups and who was representing. But the other conservative streak and misinformation I hear is about people hiding behind the Constitution itself to say, oh, well, there's so many recommendations and we haven't been able to read them all. And so did you want to talk a little bit, all of you, about the particular responsibilities that law students and law schools and law teachers have in working with you to speak about how those structures and systems work? What does a referendum process look like? What does it actually mean and structured, and how does the Constitution operate? Because I think people in the general community also get a lot of misinformation about that. So if you had advice about more things we could do in that space to help you, I'd be really, that'd be really welcome for me. Thank you.
I'm not a lawyer. You have the answers, but I think you've got to sort of take your head off and put another one on. Because we're going to have to do a whole lot of different things here so as we don't have this same old repeat generation after generation. You're in a perfect place to redesign, to reimagine what your profession could and couldn't do. You guys can do a whole lot more, actually. You do have to, it's not a criticism, it's changing. I think you too have to think about, what's taught, how it's received, and how it affects you. So everything I reckon is up for grabs now, because, oh God, we're so dreadfully boring in this country. I really despair sometimes. We're so conservative. We hate change. I mean, my God, we're not going to last a distance. And this is a perfect place. Places like Melbourne University, rich, valued, respected, prestigious, good people like yourself, Matthew, have a bit of a think, seriously consider what it is, how you're going to teach, who are the students that are coming through the door, because they're going to change as well. They're not going to be the same, but anyhow, you know what I mean. They're different as well, had a different experience at school, a different family experience, and they come to you and they want to, with ambition and desire and passion, hopefully, and then you can work with people that come. But I think you have to be ready to receive them. I think we can do pretty much whatever we want to.
Arnie's sugarcoating it a little bit. Did you want to?
Yeah, I think we need the industry's voices. We don't want people to be worried about being politically correct, or we don't want people to be worried about, stepping on other people's toes. We actually need your voices as legal professionals. When there's misinformation out there about the Constitution,
yes,
respond to that. We're not asking you to lead the campaign necessarily, that's our job, but when there's, things being written or misinformation out there that you can particularly address as a lawyer or as a legal academic, please use your voice and respond to those things in the ways that you feel comfortable doing, of course. I think what we've done as in the campaign is when there is that negative stuff, we always respond and focus on the positive, and that's another way that you can do that, in fact-checking in a way that is still positive and saying, the Constitution is made to change. The Constitution should reflect who this nation is and who it sees itself as, and it currently doesn't. And of course, all the legalities behind the Constitution and how it works and referendums, I'm sure. So I would encourage people to use their voices and push back on some of the arguments and misinformation out there that we know just isn't true. obviously everybody has the right to their opinion around this reform and proposal, but I think we should absolutely address the things that are factually and legally not true.
Yeah, we need to start with basically how the country was seated. You know, it's factually untrue. And I think, and I mean, the second thing that we need to do is basically check our unconscious biases when we come to Indigenous peoples. I think, you know, I work here, and I'm sorry to say, but there needs to be a lot of checking. And the reality is, until we actually teach an unconscious biased view of the legal system of this country, I think we're a long way from making real change. And I think if you go outside here, and I always say this at forums when I speak here, you'll see an honour board outside there. They've had 4 prime ministers just out of the law school, and they've had 9 premiers. As you go down, it's like 16 High Court judges, I think it is, 24 Supreme Court judges. So I think this is where that leadership needs to have a real in-depth understanding of this country's history and the actual issues in this country. Until that happens, I don't think we're really going to get any real change. But when it comes to the referendum and the voice, then I think it's, when you go in to vote, I think you just need to check in your biases and then really have a look around and see how unjust this country is towards its First Nations peoples. And we can rattle off the stats for you as long as you like, but the reality is, don't watch your 6 o'clock shows and your prime time news, because you're never going to get a real, you know, informed issues around this country in regards to not only Indigenous people but people of colour. We really need to really check our biases, and that's what I've been trying to push in regards to curriculum change. I've been pushing in regards to what I write about the legal system in this country, and like I said, I've been on a Royal Commission, and you know, there's been wastage of money everywhere in regards to making recommendations, and you as the taxpayer need to really make that accountable, because that's the real issue here. Again, we're 3% of the population. We don't have the political power to make that change. We'll go to the next question at the back there.
Thank you all so much. It's been really thought-provoking, not just obviously for now, but where we're heading. There is that saying, you know, you can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. And when I think of that phrase, I actually often think of the law. You know, how do we use a colonising law in order to dismantle, you know, a colonising system? But I'm really interested in your thoughts about this idea of, I guess, the law and its systems potentially being an opportunity for redemption and to redeem. And so what are some of the things that I guess that we can do from thinking it from a legal systems perspective to change that, to make sure that the law isn't necessarily serving the same interests to reinforce what is here, but to actually create change and create redemption?
You want to talk about big law?
Yeah, look, I think Eddie half answered that question just a minute ago. I can't really add to that. But well, Bridget, you might... Oh, sorry, Eddie.
You're right. I was just going to say, like, we're trying to do stuff in the curriculum, work with, you know, individuals to indigenise some of their curriculum, some of their subjects. I mean, there's pushback, there's excuses about overload, you know, work overload, you know, and then and just the, you know, the best one is academic freedom, which really freaks me out in regards to the excuse, you know, utilising that as an excuse to, when we know that it's a huge issue, right? And to continuously use academic freedom, it's roll eye material. But also we've been pushing, as an individual, I've pushed at the Law Council of Australia's, I'm on the Indigenous Reference Group, that there needs to be continuing education for lawyers. If you're going to work in an Indigenous space, you should be doing CPDs every year, and you have to do it. I mean, if you're in the health space, if you're going to work in the Indigenous space, you have to do accreditation, right? You have to. You just can't get around it. But in our space, in the legal space, no one wants to do that, right? But we're happy to work in native title and make the money that we do. Our big corporate law firms are, raking it in. And criminal law is, as we said, the numbers are, we're 28% of the population in the whole of Australia, let alone where we're from, it's 85%. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do. We're working with VLA, Victorian Legal Aid, and others here in Victoria in regards to pushing CPD as a requirement if you're going to work in this space. VLA, Victorian Legal Aid, if you're going to work and get brief outs from them, they're going to push that you are required to do mandatory work in this space. But again, I think it comes, and that's the reason why I'm here. I've just finished a PhD, so I'm not real from academic background. My experience is more about advocating for Indigenous peoples. I worked nationally at the Aboriginal Legal Services for years, and but I think with our students who are, it's our responsibility that our students have the attributes of knowing about our most, persecuted people in this country, and I think it's, and if we don't do that, our law institutions are letting everyone down in this country, right? So I think, as a student, you should be screaming that you should be coming out with that sort of attributes, not a corporate world attribute. I mean, we're getting lost in the corporate world at the moment, I think, in my personal opinion, but hey, that's where the money is, so, but that's just my view. It's probably a cynical view because I've been in this space too long, and I've worked in the criminal space, and I've advocated for better outcomes for our people. I may not have answered your question, but I'm happy to have a chat later if you want.
I would just, Auntie Pat, would you mind talking about the dialogues and how they talked about big law and why they saw that as a tool for reform?
I've talked a lot, but just...
No, go for that.
People said after this whole process and during it that we'll never get any wins here unless we use their big law. That's the only way that we can get any, they will hear us, if we use their law. And now the big law is constitutional law. Our mob knew about that because, we're the subject of all the laws, the bad ones mostly. So we know what it's all about. And that was their idea, that we could get power and our voice will be heard if we use your law, not ours. We have many as well, but we use yours, the big law, that's a constitution. Now we have done everything else. I've sat on, most of my life, I've sat on some committee or other national committee trying to sort of solve this situation or that. And sometimes, people like me have been around this long, you find yourself compromising yourself because you think, maybe this will be different this time. Maybe there will be some small gain. And so you compromise yourself. You make that conscious decision. You don't like it, but maybe there might be something here that we could gain from it. So we are absolutely, completely powerless. I wrote an article saying, using an analogy, it's like a nation state is sitting at our kitchen table with their feet under our kitchen because they intrude into all aspects of our lives. So the big law, and that's what we got. That's what we're asking. One of the reasons why we're asking for an enshrined voice in the Constitution which will give us power, and you can't take it away. The government of the day can't take it away. In our lifetime, even in Eddie's, we set up all the major committees that we've set up have just been signed away in a day. ATSIC in particular. Around the regional dialogues, everybody talked about ATSIC, and now we've got these sort of grotty little articles coming out talking about how corrupt ATSIC was. That's just bullshit. It had issues, there is no doubt about it, but they were being fixed. There was a committee that they'd set up of 3 people, 2 politicians, Bob Collins, I always forget the other man's name, and
Jackie Huggins.
Anyhow, so they'd done a complete review of ATSIC, and that was finished. They were just going to signing off, doing the last sort of maybe the covering letter to go to Parliament, and the current Minister of the day, Amanda Vanstone, just signed it away. It's gone. Just a big ATSIC, big powerful ATSIC. Regional offices all over the country. It was a very hands-on approach. You could go in, give your local commissioner a mouthful over the, the yogurt counter or the butter counter somewhere in Woolies on 10 o'clock on a Friday night. It was very direct. So everybody had access to these decision makers and what have you. So using the big law will allow us to have a proper voice. So we can have a say in all the decisions making and the policies that are around us that affect all of us. So there wouldn't have been an intervention if we'd had a voice to Parliament. A whole lot of things would have happened. And we would not have, that voice would never have allowed what happened to Adam Bruce. We would have intervened a long way before bloody AFL did. That was disgraceful. Disgraceful. It wasn't now, once, a few weeks, it went on and on and on. AFL said nothing. So the big law, so we are completely powerless in our own country. Now, there's a whole lot of people out there who will say, well, why should they have, a bigger voice in there? We're all the same. Well, we're not all the same. And, this law reform, in the scheme of things in the Indigenous world, it's conservative. This is not a big ask here. To say, it's modest, and it's conservative. I think you understand more of those of us, know that from Megan, but I've had a little look myself. But it's not a big ask. And in the scheme of things, it's nothing. We're not going to Australia isn't going to roll, slip into the sea. There's all this still, with the national land rights, people were saying things like we were going to take their backyards and run away with the Hills hoist. And then we were going to truck a rope around Uluru and pull it somewhere. I don't know where the hell we were going to take it. Absolutely, we're going to hear it all again. We're going to hear it all again, there's no doubt about it. But that's the only place left for us to go. Our bare asses are on the barbed wire here. We have nowhere to go. We're pushing off. We can't do it, though, without you.
So we've gone over time. So can we just thank our guests and really, can we go away first to think about it all? And for those who haven't read the statement, can I suggest you have a read and look out for the continued media releases and dialogues. What's your...
Thanks, Eddie. If anyone's interested, you can jump onto our website, ulurustatement.org, and we also have all of our resources, supporter kits, but you're also welcome to reach out to us. Our email address is on there. Also, please follow us on social media at Uluru Statement. We're on TikTok.
I don't do this.
Auntie Pat is our viral person on TikTok, so she's famous. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So keep up to date, sign up to our newsletter on our website, and follow us on this journey, and hopefully we see you being active allies in your own communities as well around it.
All right, so can we give them a round of applause? And thank you for coming. That's what it's all about, right? Again, we're 3% and we need our friends, so appreciate you giving us your time. Thank you.